I never thought I'd hear my own voice get me fired. One minute I was giving standard quality feedback during a prototype review, the next my words were being quoted out of context in a private office across the hall. I didn't understand it right away. I thought maybe someone had made a mistake. But the look on the HR director's face told me otherwise, flat, polite, and already moving on. My name is Martin Reyes. I'm 38 years old, and until recently, I was the lead product engineer at a mid-sized tech firm called Holtron Imagineering. For 9 years, I worked in the same glass-walled corner of the third floor, surrounded by whiteboards scribbled in red ink and the soft hum of circuit analyzers running after hours. I'm not flashy. I don't make TED Talks or show off blueprints on LinkedIn. I build things, real things. Devices that get mounted into rescue drones or neonatal monitors, tools that save lives, tools that matter. And for the longest time, I thought I mattered too. I didn't grow up with much. I earned every scrap of respect in that place with blistered hands and sleepless nights. I was the guy folks ran to when a project failed burn-in testing the day before review. I was the one who could trace a voltage drop with his eyes closed. The interns called me Reyes the Rescue, like it was an inside joke, but they meant it with real admiration. That used to mean the world to me. Then came the announcement. It was one of those all-hands videos sent out instead of an actual meeting. The CEO stood in front of the atrium fountain in that sky blue blazer he always wore for media clips and said, "I'm thrilled to introduce someone many of you may already know in a different capacity, my daughter, Alina." He smiled the way only people who've never been told no can smile. She's just completed her accelerated dual degree from Stanford and MIT. We're excited for her to join the product innovation branch and carry forward the Holtron legacy of disrupting limits. The rest of the email was standard noise. Synergy opportunities, new horizons, words you copy-paste from a press release. I kept expecting it to say she'd be shadowing leadership, getting a feel for operations. But no. According to the reorg chart updated just 20 minutes later, she wasn't shadowing anyone. Alina Becker was now listed as Junior Lead Engineer, directly under my name. The first time we met, she was sipping an energy drink that looked like it belonged in a nightclub. She didn't say hello, just pointed to the prototype pressure sleeve sitting half-exploded on my lab bench and said, "So, is this the one that keeps failing in the stress chamber?" There was no warmth, no curiosity, just entitlement. Still, I tried to be cordial. I gave her the rundown, explained the issues with the internal pressure transducer, went over the last 6 iterations. Her eyes glazed about 30 seconds in. "I'll just wing it," she said, popping her gum. That's how I learn best. I should have known right then. Over the next 2 weeks, the lab started to feel like a stage set on fire. She skipped briefings, passed off untested adjustments as conceptual R&D, and derailed safety reviews with off-topic questions about our visual branding potential. Everyone kept walking on eggshells. I heard whispers from the junior team about how weird things had gotten, how scary it felt to speak up. But no one wanted to go against the boss's daughter, especially not with the fiscal year so close to ending. Then she crashed our central test database. Somehow, while trying to upload a personal deep dive video log, she wiped 3 days' worth of bench data and corrupted the naming protocols. She said the interface was vague and too retro. Our IT guy coughed for a solid 15 seconds before mumbling that nobody had ever logged in as a sysadmin from a lab station before. That should have been it. A formal reprimand, at least. But it wasn't. The next day, she was smiling in the break room, showing off screenshots of a cool new UI revamp she wanted to pitch. And I kept my mouth shut. Until the quarterly prototype review. When she pitched the upcoming device, a wearable kinetic converter with smart assistance, her bullet points were vague. A mix of buzzwords and copy-pasted slides from a concept sketch I'd archived months ago. I waited until she was done before I said anything. Just one comment, careful and measured. "I think we need to reassess the torque ratios on the joint rotation. There was a strain spike during backward extension, and unless we recalibrate the assist mechanism, it won't pass impact compliance." She blinked at me, then laughed. Why would I take advice from someone who's been stuck in the same job for almost a decade? Half the room went silent. The other half stared at me, waiting to see what I'd say, but I said nothing. I just nodded and sat back. 2 days later, I was sitting in HR, hearing phrases like culture management and generational communication misalignment. I had apparently made her feel compromised in a collaborative space. Just like that, they let me go. The workbench I poured 9 years of sweat into? Given to someone who didn't know the difference between an actuator and a proximity sensor. Someone who thought skips in the launch protocol were just symbolic placeholders. And no one said a word. Until that moment, I really believed quality mattered more than politics. Turns out it doesn't. Not here. Not anymore. She wasn't qualified. That was clear within the first week. I don't mean she struggled a little or needed time to acclimate. I mean she didn't know Jack. Our lab runs on precision and patience, neither of which she possessed. Day 1. I handed her a simple schematic from the wearable converter design and asked her to walk me through the power regulation path. She tilted her head like a confused dog and said, "What's the little horseshoe symbol mean?" I stared at her. "That's a resistor," I said. "Oh, right. Got it." She nodded like she did, then immediately turned around and asked one of the interns where we kept our idea boards. She spent most of the first week bouncing between my desk and the espresso machine. Every time I tried to get her involved, she'd derail it into a brainstorm session about how we could make the device go viral. She mentioned influencer campaigns, .LED ribbons. One time she asked what would happen if we embedded it with haptics that pulsed to the beat of music. I asked her what use case that served for industrial exosupport gear. She shrugged and told me I was thinking too small. Still, I kept at it. I gave her basic tasks, calibration logs, component checks, a chance to get her hands dirty. But she pawned off every one of them. First to Ellis, then to Nina, then to this poor intern named Carter who hadn't even finished orientation. I pulled her aside once, told her gently that jumping ahead without understanding the fundamentals was going to get someone hurt. She rolled her eyes and said, "I'm here for vision, not voltmeters." The CEO stopped by the lab the next day, just long enough to shake her hand and beam about fresh thinking. He didn't even glance at me. That was the moment I realized how deep it went. A few days later came the database incident. She was trying to record this vlog, something she called her Journey Archive, and uploaded a 4K video file directly into the core testing repository. She crashed it. 3 days of work gone. Temperature logs, failure points, voltage intervals. Poof! The server choked so hard our entire equipment bank had to be rebooted in sequence. I watched Ned from IT stare in disbelief for nearly 30 seconds after tracing the access ID back to her login. No apology, no accountability. Just a shrug and a half laugh. Well, someone should have built a better interface. I took it to my manager, brought printouts of the access logs and asked if we were going to escalate it. He looked like I just asked him to slap the CEO himself. "She's new," he said, voice tight. "Just let her get her footing. Focus on your section." That stung, but I let it go. Once. Then came the team meeting. We were in one of the bigger conference rooms doing our final walkthrough before the next prototype build. Everyone was there, mechanicals, firmware, biology consultants, integration leads. I waited my turn and then pointed out the elevation angle on our rotational joint 5 degrees off from the stress-safe margin. Nothing accusatory, just a correction like we'd all done for each other 100 times before. She cut me off halfway through. "Are you really gonna nitpick a few degrees?" she asked, loud enough to make several heads jerk upward. "We're innovating, not building IKEA furniture." There were awkward chuckles. No one knew whose side they were supposed to be on. Then she twisted the knife. Why would I take advice from someone who's been stuck in the same job for almost a decade? There it was. I didn't say a thing. I just sat down. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out, and one of us had power behind her last name. 2 days later, the HR meeting. They started with false politeness, the kind of script you deliver when you're already halfway past resolution and just crossing legal TCs. Words like conflict energy and evolving workplace norms were thrown around. Then they told me my comments during the meeting had made her feel unsafe, that my tendency toward critical feedback was creating a hostile limitation-based atmosphere. I asked them if they'd bothered to check the schematics, the performance logs, anything the team had flagged. They hadn't, or they didn't care. Because this wasn't about engineering. It was politics. Legacy. making room for an heir apparent who didn't want a mentor unless he clapped at her PowerPoint transitions. They offered a soft exit, said they'd keep my name off any public filings if I agreed not to reach out to clients or colleagues. 8 years of service, packed into 2 signed pages and an HR rep who wouldn't make eye contact. I walked out with my badge in a manila envelope and a dead silence around my workstation, where yesterday people used to laugh at my bad coffee jokes and ask me how to reflow a solder pad. Every design, every fix, even my test matrices, they handed it all to her. I didn't even get a thank you. Fine, if she wanted to inherit something she didn't understand. Then she could live with the consequences. For a week I sat in my apartment like a ghost, convincing myself I wasn't haunted. I chewed on silence, took long walks that didn't go anywhere, and stared at job boards like they were all written in another language. Nothing felt real. The projects I'd built, the people I mentored, the 9 years, it all evaporated in the span of a single HR meeting. Every now and then I'd hear a Slack notification and instinctively reach for my work phone only to remember it was locked in a drawer across town. I told myself I'd move on. Told myself those corporate types weren't worth my energy. But there's something about watching someone destroy your work with ignorance and still take a bow afterward that gnaws at you. You start replaying every warning you gave them, every time you tried to help, every error they refused to fix. And the worst part? I knew what was going to happen. I'd been around enough failed launches to feel it in my bones, the quiet ticking of systems misaligned, waiting to snap under pressure. Then Tuesday came. I couldn't sleep, so I started digging through my external hard drive just to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the mess they were about to unleash. The folders were still intact. QA reports, thermal drift tests, annotated schematics, even screen caps of the failed diagnostics she refused to address. I wasn't bitter yet. I just wanted to see the truth again. And there it was. The build report from 2 weeks before the HR meeting. The exact prototype they were prepping for launch. The same one where she stood up in the lab and waved off our alerts like they were spam emails. It had 3 unresolved critical issues. First, the voltage regulator was pulling uneven draws under load, which meant most devices would burn out within hours if operated continuously. Second, the joint housing had microfractures. Nothing you could see with the naked eye, not even on a casual stress test, but under real-world torque applications. It'd snap. And third, the firmware. God, the firmware. It wasn't even a finished build. She had literally taken a mid-test version and locked it as final because, and I quote, "It boots fast and the animated splash screen looks good." That version had a memory leak we hadn't resolved, plus a misrouting in the alarm subsystem that disabled all failsafes if the user tried to override a fault state. In short, it was a polished coffin. I sat there for a while, just breathing, staring at the report, letting my heartbeat slow so I could think clearly. She had convinced the executive team not to run further tests, told them it would kill momentum, glossed over every flagged metric. I'd been there. I had sent the emails. I had watched her scroll past them like they were filler text. That's when the clarity came, not like a light bulb flickering on, but like headlights flaring up behind you in the rearview mirror. Sudden, bright, icy. They were going to tank this thing in public. And worse, nobody left on that team even knew. They thought it was launch ready, all because she told them so. For a while, I just let the thoughts stew, pacing, staring out the window, watching streetlights flicker like they understood what I was about to do. And you know what? I didn't feel vengeful. Not yet. I felt responsible. That prototype had been my team's work, my hours. My fingerprints were all over the thing. I didn't build it to make someone crash and burn. I built it to help people with spinal support injury regain posture, real control, something that mattered. And now it was being trotted out like a showroom toy because a CEO wanted his daughter to feel powerful. I could have walked away. Should have. But as I scrolled through those reports again, something shifted. And this time it wasn't guilt. It was resolve. She wanted sole credit for the launch? Fine. She could have it. All of it. Every blinking error. Every failure she pretended didn't exist. Every issue I was told to let go because it's not your scope anymore. She would go live, and the world would see with absolute clarity what happens when you cut out the people who know what they're doing, just to crown someone who doesn't. That night, I powered up my personal rig, the same one I'd used to troubleshoot unstated clock errors at 2 a.m. I started reviewing logs off my mirror backups, checking timestamps, seeing where I still had footprints in the source control pipeline. Turns out, no one had locked me out properly. You'd think a tech company would remember that offboarding a lead systems engineer requires more than a revoked badge. That's when the plan started forming. Quietly. Deliberately. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. I was just going to let her launch exactly what she insisted was flawless. Let her stand in front of the world and hit that power button, and let the truth my truth do the rest. I started with their repositories. They had removed my admin credentials, sure, but they hadn't cleared duplicate access scripts I'd built over the years to run silent checks during off hours. At one point, they even encouraged those kinds of automations. Saved the company time, boosted system visibility. Funny how all those so-called innovations became my ticket back in. The engineering share was still syncing to a few backup drives I had set up. Nothing illegal, just safety nets. A habit from years of watching centralized file systems crash during crunch week. Turns out those redundant mirrors included pathing logs, audit trails, access timestamps, version pushes. About 2 hours of digging showed me exactly what they'd touched, and more importantly, what they hadn't. The last confirmed build, the one marked Final Master Approved, still carried my comment thread from over a month ago. My rejection note was still attached, visible in the metadata, which meant if anyone really looked, they would see I hadn't greenlit it, but only if they looked deep. And given how fast they were pushing this launch narrative, I doubted anyone had time to dig. So I started pruning. I couldn't delete the comments outright that would have triggered alerts, but I knew how to rewrite them in the back-end logs. Swapped out the labels, altered the thread status from flagged fault detected to QA noted passed under load. Reworded the timestamp labels just enough to look like a secondary verification, not a lie, just reinterpreted compliance. Next, I checked the diagnostic toolchain links embedded in her final report, each chart, each graph, every fake data point meant to back up her speech. Most referenced front-end wrappers I'd built months ago for internal presentations. She'd pulled them. After I was gone, likely assuming no one would question the aesthetic. Bright colors, simplified metrics, digestible visuals for execs who never read the footnotes. I left those visuals intact, but I disabled the drill-down fields. Without the sublayers, no one could trace where the data originated, and the logs now funneled through a localized cache node. I redirected to a dormant AWS instance under my name, controlled externally, invisible to their continuity monitors. All that would do was silence the evidence trail. I wasn't embedding bugs or coding in any damage. That wasn't the point. I wasn't about to become the person they accused me of being. I just gave her what she wanted. Unfiltered ownership. After that, I reached out to Danny. He was one of the few left I trusted. A second-year intern who treated the lab like sacred ground. No ego. Just a kid who actually listened when I explained why thermal variance could wreck a voltage sensor array. I pinged him from an old side email I used for contractor correspondence. No mention of what happened, no bitterness. Just one line. Can you pull the firmware bin from the staging server for the model PRO V2 Iwapamwood 17A? Date stamp around 3 weeks ago. He replied 7 minutes later. Here. No questions, no commentary. Just the file. I ran it through a diff check script against the last stable build I'd logged before getting kicked out. It was exactly as I feared, the same untested version. Internal safeguards still commented out in the code, logic paths soldered into dead ends, and that critical error in the user override failsafe, still there, entirely untouched. She had taken the worst possible iteration, slapped a release tag on it, and was cartwheeling toward a global reveal like she'd molded it from stardust. But the real kicker was in the archive package. She had bundled the firmware with an installer that still used one of my debug certs. From when we ran internal demos using my local keygen script meant only for staging builds. That exposed a glaring oversight. When you don't update your key authority paths, guess what happens? The cert chain remains authentically old, not expired, just untraceable. It didn't reflect new ownership. which meant if something went wrong, it wouldn't point to her or anyone still working there. It pointed to me. She'd built herself a clean narrative. If the launch went sideways, blame could be ambiguously shifted to former configurations or legacy credentials. That twisted something deep inside me, so I unhooked the cert trail, redirected the debug signature to a sandbox endpoint I maintained during beta tests, clean, isolated, time-stamped, somewhere safe, somewhere I controlled. So when her device failed and there wouldn't be a shadow of accountability stuck to my ID, she would stand on stage alone. No technical scaffolding under her feet, no quietly loyal developers catching her mistakes in the shadows. Just flashing lights, a smug speech about breaking limits, and a ticking time bomb no one but me knew was even armed. Everything else I did was observational. I ghosted through update schedules, checked discourse threads, read employee Slack threads through a web proxy I'd set up for dashboard aggregation when I was still building reporting tools. They were prepping, getting excited. No one saw the gaps, so I went quiet again, powered down the rig, let the weight of what I'd just done settle on me like morning fog. I still hadn't sabotaged anything. She'd done all of it herself. I had simply removed the parachute. Launch day arrived like a pageant crowned in overconfidence. Industrial lights rigged overhead, velvet ropes blocking off access points, sleek product banners curling from ceiling rigs like invitations to a coronation. The venue, a rented-out tech pavilion downtown, was overflowing. Rows of folding chairs paired with brushed metal demo stands, each one holding mock-ups of the device that still didn't work. I wore a baseball cap pulled low, slipped in, through the side crowd entrance with 3 days stubble and a press badge I printed from an outdated Dropbox file. Nobody so much as glanced at me. Too many influencers vlogging, too many interns racing around with clipboard checklists and sponsored espresso cups. Everyone had a role. I came dressed as a question. She took the stage with a smile carved out of nerves and caffeine, her hands clasped like she was grounding herself against the voltage of her own ego. The crowd applauded on cue. Someone in the second row launched a cheer, probably staged. Then the speech began. It was exactly what I expected. Corporate pablum, with a sprinkle of rehearsed intimacy. She talked about disruption, about legacy in her words. The opportunity to rewrite what it means to engineer something meaningful. She thanked her mentors vaguely, claimed to honor the work that paved this path without naming a single contributor. Then she wrapped it all in a ribbon of faux vulnerability. This isn't just a product to me, she said. This is my turning point. She got that much right. The demonstration table was rolled out silently from stage left, built like a magician's podium. The Pro V.117AA perched on top like a trophy. 4 minimalist touchpads arranged along one edge, a display screen folded flush against the chassis, spotlights catching just enough reflection to make it shimmer. Like conviction incarnate, she stepped forward. Her tone shifted, less dreamy, more confident, walking them through use case scenarios without blinking. Claiming real-time adaptive support algorithms, cross-device integrations, even whispered something about a future with ambient AI. I had to give it to her. She had learned how to sound like someone who believed in it. Then came the moment. She turned to the crowd, held up one manicured finger with the poise of someone mimicking a TED Talk closer, and pressed the power button. Nothing. A beat passed. She did it again with slow deliberation, as if giving the device the theatrical benefit of the doubt. Still nothing. No glow from the screen. Not even a boot indicator. Her eyes twitched toward the tech staff huddled by the curtain. Murmurs started to thread through the audience. Then a faint flicker. The display attempted a start sequence, a splash of blue. A bar across the bottom, but it froze halfway. A warning glyph appeared momentarily before the screen flashed, glitched, then hissed back to silence. A low crack came from inside the casing, like plastic under stress. Not dramatic, just audible enough to kill every last sliver of doubt. I watched her mouth tighten. She took a half step back like the table might betray her further. Someone in the crowd coughed. Then another person stood up, tablet in hand, asking if this was part of the optimization stress test she'd mentioned in a pre-press email. No, she said. Just that. One sharp syllable full of exposed wires. A technician darted out, unplugged something, replugged, Rebooted. Flipped the auxiliary power switch with the gentleness of someone finding a sleeping snake. Still nothing. From my seat near the side aisle, I saw her starting to sweat. Real sweat. The kind that glosses the nose and upper lip when adrenaline realizes it has nothing left to leverage. Reporters began checking their cameras. A few were already uploading images. One guy angled sideways in his chair, live streaming the chaos with a whispering commentary about premature hardware launches and corporate negligence. Buzzwords began to stir: unsafe, unstable, untested. She grabbed the mic again, tried to laugh, called it a demo bug, and blamed transit vibrations. Weak. Nobody believed it. Companies that launch with confidence don't stumble on stage. Just then I saw someone from engineering push through the far curtain, his expression blank. He spoke into an earpiece while frowning at a tablet. I knew that look. That was the face of someone realizing the firmware hadn't even passed gate-level trigger checks, that the operating logic never even reached bootstrap, that someone had greenlit a lemon sealed in chrome. They killed the video feed about 10 minutes later. The room never recovered. The smell of heated casing was still in the air when they started moving people out quietly. A few reporters were escorted toward a back area for extended questions. The rest of the audience was given free branded items and hustled toward drink stations. The distraction as transparent as it was pathetic. She disappeared backstage. I never saw her reemerge. I walked out at the same time as the AV team. Nobody stopped me. I kept my head low, badge tucked into my jacket pocket. Even if someone had looked my way, they wouldn't have recognized me. That man in the audience wasn't their legacy engineer. He was just a ghost with a front row seat to justice. The company put on a brave face the next day, as if they could PR spin their way out of electrical smoke and catastrophic silence. But the footage had already spread. Clips were cut, paired with dramatic music and titles like "Tech Heiress Fails Hard." Engineering memes sprouted within hours. And though they tried to disable comments on their official pages, the thread spun feral across the internet. Endless loops of her blinking in confusion, the frozen screen mid-glitch, the crowd's uncomfortable shifting in audio detail. By afternoon, the company had issued a statement that read more like a half-hearted eulogy than an apology. Vague suggestions of hardware miscommunication. A reminder that this version was a demonstration model only. Subtle blame tucked between lines about unforeseeable complications and our unwavering commitment to innovation. Internally, the gears ground louder than ever. Quiet investigations leaked through the grapevine. I knew people who were suddenly pulled into emergency audits, their inboxes combed, their access history pinged for review. Department leads were reshuffled. One of the heads of firmware resigned that week without explanation. Another senior engineer was escorted from the building after a tense closed-door session with legal. And her? She vanished. Not like a dramatic exit or any grand gesture. Just gone. Her company issued LinkedIn scrubbed, her headshot removed from the team page. Blog articles ghost-edited to remove her name entirely. She'd left so little real work behind that her absence barely left a trace. Only picture frames on someone else's desk and a half-finished travel mug in the break room said she'd ever belonged there. Through all this, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out to gawk or needle or scold. Instead, I kept a folder, a private one with screenshots, email timestamps, archived footage of that launch day. Not because I needed proof, but because sometimes when the world insists on forgetting what actually happened, you owe it to yourself to remember it clearly. And some part of me still couldn't believe it had worked when the dust settled and the uses for silence dried up. I finally heard from some old co-workers, a terse message from Amanda in mechanical design, just the word wow, followed by a thumbs-up emoji. Derek sent a half-hearted joke about whether I was free for a sabotage consult. Another email just said, "Thank you for not letting her kill someone with that thing." Only one of them asked outright, "Was it you?" I didn't answer. They didn't follow up. By then I had already moved. Not far, but far enough to start over. I joined a startup run by people who still spoke the language of creation instead of empire, a place where you could bring forward safety concerns without needing to coat them in political sugar. It was smaller, harsher in some ways. No luxury espresso machines, no branded umbrellas for light drizzle days. But the work mattered. And when I walked through the lab, when I set a wrench down on the metal counter or opened a new spec doc, I remembered who I was again. They asked no questions about my past. They said they'd heard rumors, sure, but nobody brought them up. I was hired for my skills, for what I could fix, for what I could build. Nothing else. Some nights I think about her. Not like a villain in a story, not some cartoon arc with swelling revenge music. Just as a person. One who was never ready. Who never asked herself if she should be more prepared before dressing power in assumption. Who thought being given something meant being worth something. Part of me wanted to hate her, but truth is I mostly pitied her. She never knew what it meant to earn respect. Never learned how a true engineer inches toward progress through humility and failure. All she knew was spotlight, and spotlights blind you if you stare too long. So yeah, maybe she did change what it meant to engineer something. But not like she meant to. She became a warning, and I became free. That was the last time I walked away from anything burning behind me, and the only time I never looked back.